listening to the Labor Notes Podcast, our weekly show on rank and file news and organizing tactics. I'm Danielle Smith, an organizer at Labor Notes.
And I'm Natasha Elena Yeoman, a staff writer at Labor Notes. These past few weeks, you've heard us mention our webinar with Haymarket Books and the American Prospect, featuring contributions to our Roundtable series on how unions can defend worker power under Trump 2.0.
And now you can hear that webinar right here on the pod. We'll be breaking it up into a few episodes, but plan to post the webinar in its entirety. So go ahead and make yourself comfortable for part 1.
In this webinar audio, you'll hear perspectives from Baltimore Teachers Union President Diamond Tay Brown, Chicago Teachers Union Vice President Jackson Potter, and UAW Region 9A Director Brandon Mancia. And that's the order in which they'll first appear in the episode if you want to keep track of who's who.
You'll also hear Natasha, who co-moderated the webinar with David Dayen from the American Prospect. I guess I'm not technically speaking in this particular webinar, but if you listen really carefully, you can hear me in the audience, tuning in thoughtfully and deeply contemplating the next steps for the labor movement.
Yeah, just be sure to turn your volume up if you want to hear that. Oh, and one last thing, you might hear some audio glitches from disruptions to internet service during the webinar, which was held online. Okay, well, without any further ado, here's the first part of our webinar. How can unions defend worker power against Trump 2.0? Hi all, thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Natasha Elena Yeoman, and I'm a staff writer at Labor Notes. I'm joined by my co-moderator, David Dayen of the American Prospect, and our brilliant panel that I will introduce in just a moment. There is no denying that the labor movement is in a precarious moment. Trump has torn up union contracts covering 1 million federal employees, the single largest union-busting act in U.S. history. His administration is terrorizing immigrant workers with barbaric raids in the public eye in hopes of pushing workers into the shadows. An already hamstrung NLRB is facing court challenges that could severely undermine its long-term functioning, and employers are hell-bent on testing the limits of their power in this moment to discipline workers and their unions. What can unions do to survive in the second Trump presidency? What tactics and strategies can help organize more new members and best survive an all-out assault on labor and other rights? This is a question we've been taking up at Labor Notes through our Roundtable series in partnership with the American Prospect, which you can find at labornotes.org/roundtable and soon to be reprinted at full at prospect.org. Labor Notes has been soliciting contributions from organizers and scholars on what unions can do besides hide or try to curry favor. Our goal is to help organizers think about this moment that we're in and reflect critically on strategies at their disposal. We're very grateful for our co-sponsors, Haymarket Books and the American Prospect, for making this event possible. And I'm grateful that we are joined by our panelists who are uniquely equipped to help us think through these questions. We're joined tonight by Brandon Mancia, UAW Region 9A Director, Diamond Tay Brown, President of the Baltimore Teachers Union, and Jackson Potter, Vice President of the Chicago Teachers Union. I am going to kick us off with a question for all of you. To start, can you give us a sense of how the terrain has shifted for your union and other unions you're in touch with over the past year? What has changed under Trump?
I can start. A couple of things have shifted. One of the things I'm noticing is that we're getting a lot more requests to be in coalitions. I think that's a great thing. And we really want to take advantage of that. It's great to see more workers seeking to work together. We're also fortunately getting more members interested in organizing. I know a lot of people are feeling a lot of fear and uncertainty in this time, but people are using that fear to do something, and they're reaching out to say, how can I be more involved in my union? Or is there anything that you guys are working on that I can be helpful with? There's been a lot more focus on revenue generation. I think because people are seeing all the different ways that we're being challenged with funding cuts. And so people want to be more on offense there. And lastly, I'll say that I've seen a lot more communal spaces be created. And I know in my local, at the Baltimore Teachers Union, we are intentionally creating more space for people to be communal because people don't want to be alone. They want to be together. They want to feel joy. They want to feel a sense of belonging. And so we're creating those opportunities for people to do that. And I'm seeing that happen in a lot of other spaces as well.
Happy to go next. Um, Agree with what was said around like the coalition work that President Brown referenced is growing, and it's kind of the best of worlds and the worst of worlds. We have, the 13th largest military on the planet in ICE and federal agencies deploying into our cities and wreaking havoc, spreading terror and fear, pointing guns, using unconstitutional police tactics, really trying to inflict a Gestapo like terror on our communities. And yet, and still, the greatest amount of like solidaristic expression I've seen in my lifetime with people coming out of the woodwork, setting up rapid response, going to schools before and after dismissal to protect and defend, monitor, resist, confront, and willingly put their bodies on the line to ensure that our neighbors, immigrant families, Black families that are in the crosshairs of this administration are protected. I'd also say that workers and our unions seem to be finally considering that maybe what we've been doing all along isn't working, and certainly not well enough. So, we just held the first strike school that Mayday Strong sponsored with People's Action. And there were clergy, there were immigrant rights groups, there were civil rights groups, there were auto workers and nurses and communication workers and teachers together cross training. And there just isn't enough of that outside of labor notes, where unions themselves are willingly and voluntarily partaking in that kind of dynamic effort. So I have a lot of hope, and there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think, well, first of all, thank you all for the invitation and for hosting this event. Um, I think it's important to take account of what is truly different about this moment and what is the same and a continuity of what we've been dealing with all along, because I think that's the only way to actually make sense of what we're supposed to do as a labor movement and as working class organizations going forward. Um, what is truly shocking and horrible is, everything that, my two co-panelists have already said. The escalation of attacks on immigrants, on civil rights, on civil liberties, the attack on unions, and the attack on federal workers specifically, which dwarfs what happened to Patco, frankly, by this point. And also, I think there was a moment, where we thought in the labor movement, nowhere near the scale needed, but that we could revive a labor movement. We could organize. We could start thinking about building density. This was because of a combination of big reform efforts in major unions like the Teamsters and UAW, and of course that's building on the legacy of CTU and others within the teachers unions and the rank and file efforts that have happened in the labor movement among teachers over the last decade. But there's also the Biden NLRB, which was truly trying to tip the scale back to an equal playing field, away from corporate power and the bosses. And so, we had the breakthrough at Amazon. We had Starbucks Workers United. The UAW finally organized at Volkswagen in Tennessee. I can go on and on about all the different victories at small workplaces to large workplaces that we were starting to see. And that has really taken a hit. It's not over. By no means does that mean that organizing is not possible under Trump or under this new um, federal landscape. But what has happened is a sense that we are a lot more on defense, right? And it's hard to think about a positive vision if you're always having to defend the very little you have. And so the Trump offensive has been really something, and it's been disorienting, I think, a lot politically for people in order to make sense of that. But what's the same? The same is that, we're still dealing with the same forces as always, right? I said escalation of attacks against immigrants. I didn't say for the first time ever attack on immigrants, right? I said, a horrible turn at the NLRB doesn't mean we haven't dealt with NLRBs that are not worker friendly or union friendly in the past. Corporate greed, concentration of power, rampant inequality, and at the bottom of it, politically, a Democratic Party that doesn't know how to take on a fight. And so that's the other part of this, right? That we have to organize a different kind of vision politically. And I think, one thing that we'll touch upon, I think today is also the fact that um, say what we want about what the labor movement stands for and working class principles and organization. More working class people voted for Donald Trump in this past election than they did in the previous two elections. And that needs to be taken into account because any vision going forward that is centered on a different vision of working class politics has to make sense that you're going to have to organize with those very same people. You cannot ignore that. You have to work within the conditions of what the working class is today to begin with. So that looks different in New York City, in Chicago, in LA, in Tennessee, right? And I think that's also important to take into account that you have to be rooted in those local fights. But we have no choice but to engage in those fights as they are right now.
Great. Well, thank you to Brandon and our panelists. I just want to say that the American Prospect is proud to be partnering on this, and thanks to Labor Notes for reaching out and making this happen. I want to follow a little bit on some of what Brandon said and put this question out to the group. A lot of people, I think, talk about the Trump administration in these very existential terms, like we're in a fight for our democracy. This is an existential moment for whether it's the labor movement or just sort of the polity writ large. But there's another existential moment for unions that's been happening all along, and this is similar to what Brandon was saying. Right now, we have 6% union density in the private sector, which was in the 30s, in the 1950s and 60s. So the question is, how do you work on not just beating back the existential threat of today and move forward on the existential threat that's been happening for 40 years, which is the slow dissolution of union density across the entire economy? And any of you can take that.
I mean, I can start this round. I think it's good to look at history in terms of when we've seen the labor movement rise and fall. And so it's important to note, if you look at the 1920s, according to historian Stephen Hahn, the biggest political movement of the 20s was the Ku Klux Klan, and it was in the North. Chicago, I think had 50,000 members. There were 5 million members nationwide. You had, Father Coughlin, you had Huey Long, you had these populists really feeding a frenzy of xenophobia and anti-Semitism. And it was the Great Depression that interrupted that movement's momentum. You had anti-immigrant laws passed, and during that moment, workers rose up. You had the Flint strikes, you had steel strikes, you had all kinds of activity, Minneapolis truckers, and those things in building the CIO created the greatest improvement to workers' lives in probably the entire history of the country. And it shifted into a New Deal that, went away from the kind of eugenics that had dominated the prior period. So that tells me that a phoenix can rise from the ashes, that the labor movement is not even close to being extinguished, that it just takes some sparks and effort and initiative, coordination, resources, and some vision, imagination to revive what seems to be broken or dormant. And we did that with the CTU. Like in 2012, we engaged structures that had been moribund and were petrified in kind of bad practice and revive them to a point where we're able to take on one of the most powerful politicians and beat them in Chicago. And that lent itself to a whole set of teachers taking action, even in red states with the Red for Ed movement, where union rights weren't secure or institutional, and people were able to win big things that way. So I do think right now is a moment where, unions have a high degree of popularity. People think socialism is viable. So how do we generate opportunities for not just those in unions, that 10%, but the 100% of workers who need one, who want health care that's affordable, who want dignified living wages, who want affordable housing, who believe in free college and early childhood education for all and childcare for all. These are popular majoritarian issues. And so, to Brandon's point, if we stand on these popular issues and we begin an arc of escalation together, labor and community united in coalition, I think it's unstoppable. And we just have to provide some vehicles and opportunities for people to express that shared vision.
I agree with Jackson, and I really agree with the vision setting. I'm a strong proponent of labor having an agenda. We know we don't want an authoritarian in office, but I think we also have to talk about what do we want? Because I don't want what we had before the authoritarian. I don't think uh the two-party duopoly is the best system for us either. And so we have to have a concrete agenda so that way we have a guide to follow, a way to determine who we endorse. So we're not just endorsing based off of things like what the candidate's best speech is and whatever dreams they're willing to sell us, but are they willing to um, help us push our agenda along? So if one of the things on our agenda is no less than $35 starting wage for any worker, that's the question that should be asked for anybody that we're willing to endorse. Yes, it should be less about us hearing what they want and more about seeing if they're willing to do what we want. I think also we have to strengthen organizational structures and work towards supermajorities, which is something that CTU pushes very often, and use the pathways that have been set for us. We are working in the BTU to build our 10-to-1 ratios, make sure we have building representatives at every work site, make sure we have union chapter committees, make sure just these basic foundational things that help with organizing are strengthened, because we can talk about all of these big issues and stopping the MAGA agenda and the future of the labor movement, but if we don't have anybody to show up to actually do the work and move these things along, we're just uh sharing our analysis and sharing a vision, but we don't just want to share a vision, we want that vision. I think we need to be working towards increasing membership, engagement, education, especially around things like May Day, contract alignment, workers' rights. And we need to be working to improve our relationships with community and whatever constituency we serve. I think these basic foundational organizing things are and pressing them even harder and harder and harder is going to be very important for whatever fight we want to get into.
Yeah, I think building off of that, I think at the core we're saying I think the same thing, which is great. But I think we have to be fighting unions, unions that are putting the struggles at the workplace and in our communities front and center in the world, the work we do. We cannot be pretending to have ambitions politically, wheeling and dealing in politics, if we're not actually doing the work of organizing our membership, winning strong contracts, making drastic, real improvements in our own membership's lives. Um, Also, organizing density in the sectors that we represent, organizing in new sectors that don't have much representation, supporting workers who right now want to organize more than ever, even though the law is stacked against them, giving them the resources to organize. And then, yeah, I think we're all saying the same thing at the end. Like, we need to have a vision for a working class politics that actually serves the people, actually builds worker power, and is not, the fake version that is being offered through MAGA and other, other political ideologies that don't lead anywhere, that just lead us back in the same circles. So I'm fully on board with that.
That's our episode. Please rate us or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify. If you're listening to us on Podbean at labornotespodcast.podbean.com, download our episode.
We're still in the middle of our annual end-of-year fundraising drive. Regular donations from rank-and-file workers like you help us put on the podcast every week, along with our workshops and troublemaker schools, our reportings, and of course, the Labor Notes Conference every 2 years. One of the best ways to support us is by becoming a monthly donor, which you can do at labornotes.org/donate. If you start a new monthly donation at $10 a month or more, you'll get our limited edition Fight the Boss, Build the Union t-shirt, along with a free subscription to the Labor Notes magazine. And we'll share regular updates on Labor Notes projects. We also have a couple of workshops coming up. Our coworker Lisa and I will be running our Winning a Strong Contract series online on Mondays, December 1st and December 8th at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's a 2-part series, so plan on attending both. And we've got an in-person event coming up next month, the Troublemaker School in New Orleans on Saturday, December 6th. You can sign up for all our events at labornotes.org/events.
The Labor Notes podcast is produced by Danielle Smith, Sindhu Sundar, and myself. Our title music was written and performed by our coworker, Keith Brower Brown. See you next week. Solidarity, y'all.